two demon-possessed men met him coming out of the tombs, so fierce that no one could pass that way. And behold, they cried out, "What have you to do with us, O Son of God? Have you come to torment us before the time?" And the demons begged him, saying, "If you cast us out, please send us into the herd of pigs." And he said, "Go." So they came out and went into pigs. Now, word got around of these miracles that Jesus was doing in the area and in the region. And I'm sure that Jairus heard those miracles and heard of those miracles. So Jairus is on this mission to get to Jesus as soon as he can get to him. And so Jairus, finding Jesus, we need to understand, was only half the battle. Actually, getting to him was the more difficult part. Mark and Luke help us to understand this even more so. This is a setting. This is a situation, okay? So Jesus is teaching the people along the Sea of Galilee, okay? And the miracles that he's done has drawn such a crowd and a multitude. Mark chapter 5 says this, "And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great multitude gathered about him, and he was beside the sea." And then Luke adds, "Now when Jesus returned, the multitude welcomed him, for they had been waiting for him." So you see, there's this massive crowd that was gathered around Jesus. And we see this synagogue ruler. He's on a desperate mission. He's there to get to Jesus, to talk to Jesus, see if Jesus can help. He's pretty sure that he can, but getting to him was huge. It was difficult. So Jesus is there speaking among the crowds. And the synagogue ruler finally gets to him. Now, it must have taken quite some time for Jairus to actually made it to Jesus as the crowds were pressed upon him. It would have been like maybe going to a concert. Trying to get up close to see the musicians. Or it might have been like you're going to the Blueberry Festival. And you're shoulder to shoulder and you can't hardly walk. It might have been like going to a football game, a professional football game. You try to get a little closer so you just see the football players. But here's this ruler just trying to get close enough to Jesus, and he's making his way through the crowd, and finally he gets to Jesus, and there they are face to face. And then, let me back up a little bit here. So finally getting to Jesus, we're going to having a little bit of a delay here. I'm not advancing here. Technicians in the back. Can you help me out? Okay. When Jesus crossed into the heart, to the boat, we already looked at those passages. Okay, so when Jairus got to Jesus, we find out that Jairus fell at Jesus' feet. Matthew tells us that right there in the story that he comes to him, he came forward to him, appealing to him, and then we find out that he actually bowed down to him, is what Matthew tells us. Mark and Luke says that he literally fell at his feet. He is in desperation mode. We need to understand that. So here he is in desperation mode. He finally finds Jesus, and then he begs of Jesus, and he asks him, as he fell forward on his feet, come and do something, okay? Come and do something. So he's a desperate man. He's a desperate father. Now we come to find out Jairus was also one that was filled with courage. Because of his love for his daughter, Jairus was compelled to seek Jesus and his help no matter what. Now, you need to be reminded of something, that he was a synagogue ruler, okay? Jairus is a synagogue ruler, and you also need to be reminded that things were already getting tense between the religious leaders and Jesus himself. They were getting jealous. They were getting really jealous because Jesus, remember, he had performed many miracles. He was healing people of their diseases and sicknesses. He was doing all sorts of things like calming the sea and the storm. So the leaders were getting pretty jealous. And it was the religious leaders who eventually set in motion. And remember, they set in motion this whole crucifixion of Jesus. They were ticked off at Jesus. They felt that Jesus was blaspheming God, and they felt that Jesus was just blindly leading his people away from the faith. And so they were upset. They were ticked off at Jesus, and things were getting tense between the synagogue rulers and Jesus. Now, think about this. Jairus, his co-leaders, if you will, how would they have thought of what Jairus was doing, going and seeking to find Jesus? They were probably thinking in their mind, are you kidding me? This is the very one we're upset with. This is the very one that's leading the people astray. Why in the world would you go to Jesus? He was taking the risk of being ostracized. He was taking the risk of being ridiculed by his fellow leaders. When the Pharisees, there's a couple of conflicts that start popping up there in this passage. When the Pharisees saw that they saw this, they said to his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? In another passage, Mark chapter 9, verse 34, why? But the Pharisees said, he casts out demons by the prince of demons. So the Pharisees, they're becoming more and more agitated. Jairus, who is a synagogue ruler, doesn't care. Why? Because he's desperate. Because he's building up this courage within him. He's taking the risk. He's going to see Jesus no matter what. So Jairus was one that was filled with courage. Jairus was one that knew that things were getting tense. But he's taking this big risk going to see Jesus. Well, we also see this of his heart. Jairus was filled with great disappointment. Now again, I'd mentioned that Matthew, Mark, and Luke all share about this story, but it's in Mark that gives the fuller account, helps us to come right into the story and feel the emotion and all that's going on in Jairus' heart. So Jairus is filled with great disappointment, and I want you to see this there in Matthew chapter 9, verse 18. Remember, we mentioned this already. While he was saying these things to them, behold, a ruler came in before him saying, my daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her and she will live. Again, Matthew's just condensing the story. And he's telling us right up front that she died. But then it's Mark that helps us understand that it's this major interruption that's taking place. I want you to look with me at Mark in chapter 5, verses 25, beginning in verse 25. Now remember, Mark helps us to understand that the daughter has not yet died, okay? Mark chapter 5, beginning in verse 25, and there was a woman, and here's the interruption, okay? They're there, and just back up a little bit. Jairus talks Jesus into coming to his home to do something to heal his daughter. And so they're set off, heading to the home. This great crowd continues to follow, and verse 25 is the interruption. And there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years and who had suffered much under many physicians and spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. Verse 27, she had heard the reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment, for she said, if I touch even his garments, I will be made well. And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone out from him, immediately turned about in the crowd and said, who touched my garments? And his disciples said to him, you see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. Verse 34, and he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. And while he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? Could you imagine the discouragement that came with Jairus? He finally makes it to Jesus. Jesus and Jairus are making their way to Jairus' home, And then there's this major interruption. This lady comes out of nowhere and wants to be healed. And then there's these precious moments that are ticking by. Tick, tick, tick. And Jairus is like, come on, Jesus, hurry. Tick, tick, tick. Then there was the news that we just read about, your daughter is dead. While he was still speaking, that's Jesus, there came from the ruler's house someone who said, your daughter is dead. Wow. Talk about frustration. Talk about disappointment. I can't even imagine what it must have been like for Jairus hearing that news. This huge interruption that took place. And then Jairus beginning to think, if only this woman would have never showed up. If only the crowds would have not been here. If only I would have got to Jesus a bit sooner. And all these if onlys start coming up in his mind. We do that in our own lives, don't we? When something terrible happens, when something awful takes place, then we think about all the if onlys. If only. Well, that's one of the great struggles for those experiencing the death of a loved one. And I'm sure Jairus was seized with fear. But his fear went on to great amazement, and I want you to see this. Jesus shared some profound words to Jairus, and look at verse 36. So remember, Jairus just gets the news of the fact that his daughter had died while they were making their way back to his home. Verse 36, overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not fear, only believe. Do not fear, only believe. Such amazing statement that Jesus made. Jesus got right to the heart issue. Jesus went right to the heart issue and said, Jairus, I know you're scared. I know fear is gripping your heart right now, but listen, just believe. Just believe. So then there's the rest of the story. I always like the rest of the story. We see in verse 37, and he, Jesus, allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. Now remember, the crowd's still around him. The crowd's following him right to Jairus' house. And Jesus turns and says, okay, stop. No further. You guys, you need to stay here. This is a thing that Jairus and I need to take care of, and the disciples. So the crowd stops right there. They make their way on down the road to Jairus' house. They get to the house, and look what happens. When he entered, he said to them, why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping. So all the mourners that were there, they laughed at him, but he put them all outside. And notice, he took the child's father and mother and those who were with him, Peter, James, and John, and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, verse 41, he said to her, Talitha cumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise. And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age, and they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. So Jairus' daughter is raised alive. The good news. The rest of the story is a good story. So from fear to great amazement and joy, Jairus' heart experienced it all, and everyone, did you notice that? Everyone was immediately overcome with amazement. Immediately and completely astonished. There it is, Matthew chapter 5, verse 42. So Jairus has this great transformation of heart. Jairus' daughter is raised to life. Everyone's astonished. And I want to talk to you about some lessons from the story. Are you ready? There's some real lessons here that we can take home. Number one is this. Life on earth can be messy and painful, right? Life on earth can be messy and painful. You know, we're told in the Bible that trials are inevitable. They're not a matter of if, they're a matter of when. Jesus told his disciples, remember this in John chapter 16, verse 33, here on earth you will have many trials. And then we're told by James, the half-brother of Jesus, that we will meet trials of various kinds while here on earth. And Peter tells us that on earth are all kinds of trials. You know, you look over our prayer page and you'll see all kinds of trials that people are going through. You hang out with your friends, you work with your co-workers, and you know that trials come our way. We live in this world that we're never promised a bed full of roses, if you will. We're never promised an easy journey, but we were promised heaven through Christ and Christ alone. So this world in which we live, it's messy and painful, and we need to understand that. We need to be reminded that. And as good as this world gets, we must realize that it is not our eternal home. It's not the place where there are no mores. Heaven is the place of no mores. No more hurting, no more crying, no more pain, no more death. No more doctors, no more insurance. We need to be reminded this world in which we live is not our eternal home. So life here can be messy and painful. Number two, Jesus can work miraculously in the delays. He can work miraculously in the delays. I'm reminded of another story, and we see it happen in the life of Jairus. Jesus miraculously worked in this delay and this disappointment and this, I guess you could say this interruption, if you will. But then remember the story of Lazarus? Lazarus died. Jesus tarried for 3 more days. And then we have this Mary and Martha that's coming up to Jesus. Jesus, if you had been here, there we go again, if you'd only been here, our brother Lazarus would not have died. But Jesus worked miraculously in the delay. And we need to understand it. So when these delays come in life, be reminded that Jesus can work miraculously through them. Here's another lesson. I must learn to trust Jesus no matter how I feel. Jairus experienced a whole gamut of emotions, didn't he? He dug deep and he grabbed a hold of some amazing courage. He had some intense desperation. He had some huge frustration. And the what-ifs started coming, and all this what-ifs and the questions started coming. But Jesus reminded him, again, in that statement, do not fear, only believe. You know, so many times we can run our life by emotions, but the problem with emotions is they change from day to day. You can feel really happy and joyful one day, and the next day, you can wake up grumpy. Just ask my wife. No, I try not to be grumpy. But I'm telling you, these emotions that we have with us, they can change at a moment's notice. And we need to understand that we must learn to trust Jesus no matter how we feel. And then finally, here's another lesson, and there are more than these, but here is another lesson I want to leave with you. I need to know that Jesus is worthy of all my trust, of all my trust. Now think about this. Just in the miracles that we mentioned there in Matthew, who condensed them all together there, think about this. Jesus has the power over nature. Remember, he calmed the winds and the sea with the storm that was essentially going to sink the boat that the disciples were in. So he has power over nature. He has power over demons. Remember, he cast out the demons out of the demoniacs. He has power over sin. He forgave the paralytic. He has power over sickness. And then in this story, Mark in chapter 5, he has power even over death itself. Jesus is all powerful. He's the one who has all power available to him. And we need to trust him. And we need to know that we can trust him with all of our hearts. Right? We're going to close out with a song here this morning. Great, great song. It is well. Not the hymn, it is well, but the contemporary song, it is well. It is well with my soul. How can it be well with my soul? How can it be well with your soul? When we trust Jesus completely. So musicians, come and use this song as a prayer to God, as a praise to God, would you?